This is the Haulin Assets podcast, where we'll show you how to go from employee truck driver to savvy business owner. And we'll do it together because we're starting our own trucking company, Haulin Assets, so you'll get a front row seat through the whole process. Together with some experts in the field, we'll teach you how to set up a business, buy a truck, get your DOT and MC numbers, get insurance, and a lot more. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to Haulin Assets, Episode 5. I am Craig, and over there, Chris. Welcome back.
It's good to be back.
And today we are going to talk about buying a truck. This is the episode I have been waiting for a very, very long time. I'm really looking forward to this just because I'm fascinated by the concept of buying a truck. It's something I hadn't thought about before I met you, Chris. But before we get there, tell me a little bit about how things are going with the Haulin Assets business side of things and what you've been up to lately.
It's going pretty well. This is the first time we've sat down in front of mics for
3 weeks.
Yeah, about 3 weeks, because I've been on the road for the last 3 weeks, and I'm a rookie, but it's been fun. I've had a lot of fun experiences. Met some interesting people on the road, had some great experiences with other truck drivers and some not so great experiences with other truck drivers.
So wait, you mean truck drivers are just like everybody else and there's good ones and bad ones?
There's good ones and bad ones, happy ones and ornery ones.
So what happened? Well, give me the bad first. Let's
All right,
start
the
there.
bad one. So this was actually my very last delivery that I did just a couple days ago, was to the Costco distribution center here in Salt Lake City. And I have a delivery scheduled for 6 o'clock in the morning. They open up at 5. The broker that I was hauling the load for said, you know, get there 5:30ish and they should be able to unload you pretty quick. So I get there actually more like 5:15, and because they just opened up at 5, everybody and their mother was there to unload at the same time. So they've got this staging area where you go park and then you go into the guard shack and check in. So I get over to the staging area and it's chock full. There's no place to park. And so in front of the staging area, there's a curb that there's already like 3 other trucks parallel parked on this curb. So I go and parallel park on the curb in front of the other 3 trucks, and then go into the guard shack, check in, get back out of my truck, you know, as I'm waiting for them to assign a door to me. And I'm there for maybe another 10 or 15 minutes, and all of a sudden somebody just comes up with the flat of their hand and just raps on the side. Yeah. 50 times louder than that on the side of my sleeper, and I'm in the sleeper working on some things on my laptop. Scares the crap out of me. And so I go to the door, and there's a driver out there just yelling and cursing at me, calling me every name in the book, and tell me this isn't a parking spot, you can't park there. Well, there's literally nowhere else to park. And yeah, it is not like a designated parking area, but there's nowhere else to park. And on top of that, like, I am far enough away, and all the other trucks that are parallel parked just like me are far enough away that we're not impeding anybody from going anywhere.
Right.
So because this guy is like, I mean, he's being a total jerk. Because he's being a jerk, that kind of brings the jerk out of me a little bit.
Oh, wait, you mean you and everybody else in the world?
Yeah, probably. So the last thing I want to do is like be helpful to this guy, because he's just, I mean, he wouldn't let me get in an edgewise, explain myself, nothing. He's just like going off. So, turns his back on me, not even saying anything, runs back to his truck and pulls, I guess he gets a door, pulls his truck out right away before I even really have a chance to move. And I mean, he had like 10, 15 more feet of space that unused between him and me as he's pulling out. So, I mean, I'm not impeding him in any way, shape, or form.
And he's just being a jerk.
He's just being a jerk.
So this clearly was not a morning person.
No, obviously not. Got up on the wrong side of the bed.
There's only one side of the bed in a sleeper.
There
I've
is
seen
only
this.
one side.
Well, that's interesting. So, but you said there were some good folks on the road as well.
There were some good folks. So I am a rookie driver. I've been backing trailers, since before I even had a driver's license on a farm. So, I was good at backing those. I get the concept, but backing a 53-foot trailer, it's a totally different thing. It reacts slower. It's different. And so, I'm obviously not a polished veteran backing into a door. So the first time I have to do a 90-degree blind back, is I think it was in Houston. I can't remember for sure where it was.
I don't know exactly what that is, but it sounds nerve-wracking.
It's nerve-wracking. And so you're basically having to turn the trailer at a 90 degree on the passenger side, so you can't see what you're doing.
Gotcha.
And so I'm doing this, and I've probably been doing it for a minute, and you obviously you can tell I'm getting closer, but I'm having to get out and look a lot, and it's slow. Luckily, I'm not impeding a whole lot of traffic, but there's a guy parked in a door next to me. He gets out, he comes up to the window, and I'm rolled down the window. I'm like, I'm a rookie, and he goes, you know what? I've been doing this 30 years. And I still like having somebody spot me. It's always good to have an extra pair of eyes. Can I give you a hand and spot you? Which he did, and helped me get back in. And he was so nice about it. Like making me feel comfortable, not making me feel like an idiot because I can't back in the first time, and gave me some pointers. Just super nice about it. And I had that happen twice on this first 3 weeks. Guys doing that, and I guess what I would say is, be patient with us rookies, and, it's going to lower your blood pressure if you're not getting upset over every little thing like, the first guy did. And I can't thank those guys enough that helped me out. It's super nice when people treat you like that.
Yeah. I mean, it's, that's a rule for life as much as it is for trucking, but just, be nice out there.
Yeah. I think that karma comes back to you. I'm sure that guy's probably has a rough life. I mean, if he treats people like that all the time, I mean, you're going to have a rough life.
Right. Well, let's dive into this episode, buying that truck that you've been doing these blind 90s on. That's what I'm calling them. I don't know what they're really called. But before we get into that, I do want to remind everybody that you can get the show notes for this and all other episodes at HaulinAssetsLLC.com. No G, Chris.
No G.
HaulinAssetsLLC.com is where you can get the show notes. You're going to find a lot more information on the stuff that we talk about, the adventures that Chris is having, out on the road and getting everything set up business-wise. All that stuff is going to be found there. So we hope you'll visit us there if you have any further questions. And, of course, you can contact us as well. So now, today, what are we covering?
We are covering buying the truck.
Right. Okay, and that's a very simplified way of saying it. I'm sure we're going to get into some
get into some good details.
Some good details here. Okay, so good.
And it's a super important episode because, I mean, this is probably, if not the most important decision you're going to make, one of the very most important decisions is what truck you get, because it has such a big impact on everything that you do. I don't know if you've ever heard the story. I know Stephen Covey used to tell it, and he probably got it from somewhere as well, about the woodcutter that was trying to chop down a tree.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so let me see if I can remember this. I read the 7 Habits for Highly Effective Teens because I was a troubled teen apparently, and I needed guidance. So 2 woodcutters, they've each got an axe, and one of them takes the time to sharpen it, and the other one doesn't because it's a waste of time.
Yeah.
And the one who stops to sharpen his axe cuts down twice as many trees because his axe is sharp, etc.
Even though he takes that time out, he cuts the tree down much more quickly. Absolutely. So the point with that, or one of the points with that, and kind of relating it to the truck, is that truck is your tool, and the one woodcutter had an ineffective tool because it wasn't sharp. And the same thing kind of happens with the truck. If you buy the wrong truck that's not the right tool for the job, you're going to have a really hard time and you're going to struggle. So it's super important that you get the right tool up front so that you can be successful in your business.
Yeah. Now, in episode 4, you talked about changing the mindset, going from a driver to an owner, and I have to assume that is going to play into this as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of an absolutely critical thing, is to have that business owner mindset. You can't just think about the truck as a driver. What's the coolest thing to drive? What's the best looking thing to drive? What's kind of the truck of my dreams? Because the truck of your dreams might not line up with,
what's feasible for you.
What's feasible and what's going to make you the most money. And ultimately, you also can't think, well, I'm just going to buy the cheapest thing out there because it's going to save me money. That's where you've got to have that owner mindset and think about what is going to give me the best return on my money long run, and what's going to make the most sense financially in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, in that way, it kind of sounds a bit like anybody buying any car or any home, or any large investment where you can't just, it's not one or the other. It's not you go get the Ferrari, and it's also not get the $300 lemon on whatever lot, right? Yeah, there's that
a lot
balance.
of times it's somewhere in the middle. I mean, you take, for example, you go out and you buy a truck that's got 800,000 miles on it already. You could be 5,000 miles away from an engine blown, and then all of a sudden you're out $15,000 to $30,000 with an engine rebuild, and that's one of those things that in that first year is going to absolutely kill you if you have to go through that.
Yeah. So I mean, you've got your truck now. How's it running so far?
So far, it's been great.
Okay.
And we'll talk a little bit about
the one that you got,
the one that I've got at the end. We'll kind of
we're gonna ease into that
right now. Yeah, we're gonna. Man. At the end of the episode, we'll let everybody know what I got and why.
Well, thanks a lot for making me wait. Yeah, I've seen it, but I don't know anything about it. So I'm excited to learn more about that.
Yeah. Oftentimes, so you take, for example, I was with let's talk mileage. I was with a client, or ran into one of our clients, a guy that we've worked with a little bit when I was at a receiver. We were both delivering a load to the same place at the same time, and got talking a little bit about life on the road and how it's been for me so far. I mean, this was really in the first week or two that I was on the road. And, he was talking about how he struggled a little bit with his truck, and he bought a higher mileage truck. And over the last 2 years, he's put $80,000 into repairs on that truck. And that's more than I paid for my truck. He got it really cheap, but it's caused them some issues because he's spent a ton of repairs on it. Because it's older, he's hauling dry van stuff. And one of the advantages of a dry van is you typically can haul more weight. Well, his truck won't allow him to even haul as much weight as I can with my reefer unit, because he puts in a 40,000 pound load and he can't get up a hill. And so he's limited himself a lot on the load. Right. So it's causing him a lot of issues because he I don't think bought the right truck.
I've always been a fan. Yeah, I understand that this only goes so far, but I've always loved the phrase "you get what you pay for," because it talks about that balance, and you don't want to end up like this guy who spent $80,000 in 2 years. That just sounds like a nightmare for a business owner. So
that's all your profits going out the door right there.
Well, who needs those?
That's the whole point of this, Craig.
Oh, right. Okay, right. Oh, you're the business guy. I don't need to know about profits. I don't understand that stuff. So, okay, so let's talk about why you went with a used truck at all. Because if we're talking about a truck that's going to work well for you, my thought as you were talking about that was, well, why don't you just get a new truck? It's going to run great. It's going to run for a long time. Why not just get a new one?
That's a great question. And, that's kind of really the first question you have to answer for yourself when you're ready to buy a truck. Am I going to get something new, or am I going to get something used? And for somebody that's just stepping into the business, I mean, it's for, unless you've got some kind of, big inheritance that you got, or you won the lottery, you're not going to be able to afford to buy a brand new truck. Cause I mean, those things are,
what's a brand new truck?
$150,000 to $200,000. Ooh. And on top of that, it's not just the monthly payment on that thing. It's you've got to come up with, roughly in most situations, 10% down. So you're talking $15,000 to $20,000 down payment on one of those trucks minimum. And a lot of times, especially if you're new, you're talking more like a 20% down payment. And so then you're talking $30,000 to $60,000 down payment.
Which if you're just starting out of the gate,
you're not going to have it.
Yeah, it's a no.
And I didn't have it. I wasn't going to do that. That wasn't really an option for me. So the new versus used was a really easy question to answer. Used was really my only option.
Right, and it sounds like that would probably be the case for most people transitioning from driver to owner, right?
For sure.
I suppose, like you said, it's possible somebody nabbed a sweet inheritance, and that's a possibility, but not so much for you. So if it's not possible, you got to move on to a used option, and so that's what you went with. And tell me a little bit. Oh wait, no, dang it, we can't talk about the truck you got. You're killing me, Chris. You're killing me.
Well, we can talk a little bit about what made me decide mileage range of what to get. So I talked to a bunch of mechanics a bunch of other people in the industry that have bought some used trucks to try to find, okay, well, where's that sweet spot of mileage? Something that has enough miles on it that it's not going to break the bank to be able to buy it, but something that's still going to have a lot of good life in it. So after talking to a bunch of people, I kind of came in this range of I wanted to get something between 400,000 and 500,000 miles. And actually finding trucks around that 500,000 mile range is pretty easy because most of the major fleets, the warranty on most stuff runs out at the 500,000 mile mark. So most big fleets are turning their trucks in that they bought new around that 500,000 mile mark.
Yeah, and again, that kind of sounds familiar. That's what some car owners do if they're buying a new car. They'll take it back and sell it back to the dealership, right before that warranty runs out. Yeah. Or, like going and buying a used car from a rental car dealer, where they renew their fleet every so often, right? And so, yeah, it kind of sounds like a similar situation.
And just like with your personal car, you can buy an extended warranty.
And did you?
I did.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Is that something you recommend?
I looked at it and I think, yes, it's not one of those things that I'm super passionate that you have to buy one, but it gives you that peace of mind. So I ended up buying a 2-year, 250,000 mile extended warranty. So I've got a warranty up to 750,000 miles for the next 2 years. And that just lets me know that I'm protected against one of those really big expenses. There's still going to be some repair things that aren't covered under warranty, but they're going to be smaller, and it's not going to be one of those things that breaks the bank and puts me out of business.
Right.
And so that's why I ended up doing it.
If the engine suddenly turns to scrap at 550 or 600,
yeah,
it'll suck, but you'll be okay.
You've got two options. You can either do a 1-year warranty for 125,000 miles or a 2-year warranty for 250. The 1-year warranty, if I remember right, was about $4,000, and the 2-year warranty was just like another $2,500. So I ended up going with the 2-year.
Yeah, just to be economical.
Yep.
So okay, so now you've chosen the truck and everything's going well. But what's kind of the most surprising thing, the most eye-opening thing that you've learned up to this point in the process?
Just basically how hard of a decision it was to make. It's kind of funny because I've talked to a bunch of friends that are in the industry, and I'd ask them what their recommendation was as far as brand. And the first 3 people I talked to, the first guy's all like, "You got to get a Peterbilt. You can't get anything but a Peterbilt." And so I'm okay, great, that sounds good. I like Pete's. They're good. They're good trucks, good reputation in the industry. Go to talk to my next friend. You got to buy a Freightliner. Freightliners are great trucks. They're not super expensive. They're really easy to repair. You can repair them anywhere. You got to get a Freightliner. I'm like, okay, well, so now I have Pete's or Freightliners. And then the third guy I talked to is all like, you got to get a Kenworth. So, right off the bat, I'm getting 3 different opinions from 3 different people, and they're all 3 different trucks. It's like the Ford, Chevy, Dodge thing. Okay. Yeah, everybody's kind of got their own opinion. And talking, I look at my, friends in the industry that owns trucks and do things, and I definitely value their opinions, but I also really value mechanics' opinions because they're the ones that work on them day in and day out and can tell you, the good and the bad and the ugly of each make and model. And, in the reality, after talking with everybody, I knew I was either going to get a Freightliner, a Peterbilt, or a Kenworth, and I wasn't really super brand loyal on one of those. The one brand that I did kind of say, what, I don't think I want to get is a Volvo. And it's not because they're bad trucks, they're good trucks, but my biggest fear with Volvos, where I'm a small guy, there's not as many places where you can take them to get repaired. And I was worried about, I don't have my own shop. I don't have a place to really repair it. I've got to rely on other people. And those other 3 makes have a definitely a bigger array of places that you can go to get repairs done.
Right. But I understand that Volvos are pretty nice trucks.
They are nice trucks. And what really kind of made me sad is Volvo actually had the best interior, the interior that I like the most. They've got this one setup where instead of on the bottom bunk, they've replaced it with a table, kind of like you see in an RV. There's a workstation, a table with a bench on each side of the table, which would have been awesome for me as an owner-operator. I'm on my computer a lot doing things, and I wish I had that. I can't believe the other makes don't have that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, take note. I'm sure they're listening, Chris.
Yeah, listen, guys, that needs to Kenworth, Peterbilt, and Freightliner, you need to get that set up too.
Okay, so how did you end up deciding which one to go with? And one at some point in this episode, I get to ask what you went with. But okay,
at some point, I will allow that. Yeah.
How did you decide?
So I'm a nerd. I built a spreadsheet. I like spreadsheets, and so
Wait, the small business owner likes spreadsheets?
The small business owner really likes spreadsheets. Yeah, the guy with the finance degree really likes spreadsheets. Imagine that. So I built this spreadsheet to kind of help me evaluate, the different trucks I looked at, because I ended up looking at over 20 trucks. I'm going to post the spreadsheet on the website so people can go look at it and use it if they want, or they can adapt it, download it, adapt it, and make some changes to it, because different things are important for different people. So I kind of looked at the things that I thought that were the most important to me.
Well, I can tell you that as a linguistics guy, all this talk of spreadsheets is making me break out in hives already. But so what did you look at? What are the categories we're looking at here?
All right, before we kind of really get into the nuts and bolts of the spreadsheet, I kind of want to talk about, after talking with everybody, there were kind of three things that I decided that were really critical in making this decision. So the first was I wanted to be able to get a truck that was going to do the job I needed it to do. Second was to buy a truck that wasn't going to cost me an arm and a leg to own. And this is really probably the most critical piece, is that operating cost, the purchase price, the operating cost, the factors that go into that. And then finally was just really the third thing were the creature comforts that you wanted. So really, what was in that sleeper piece of the cab, and did it have what I wanted there?
And that was kind of your lowest tier.
Yeah, that was probably the least important, but it's still something that you wanted to have.
Sure. No, that makes sense. I've watched all the HGTV shows where they talk about your priorities. This is the same, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
Totally the same.
Totally the same. So, first talking a little bit about that thing where, some trucks are better at doing the job than other trucks. You take, for example, some trucks are really good at hauling extra heavy loads. You take a Pete 379 with a 600 horsepower Cat engine. It's got 4 axles and a double frame, and it's going to be really good at hauling those extra heavy loads. But it's not going to be the best truck for the type of thing that I want to do, the over the road, hauling a reefer stuff, because first, that truck's super heavy. So it may weigh 40,000 pounds
just by itself
with a trailer, whereas my truck weighs more like 35,000 pounds with a truck and trailer. And so, if it weighs 5,000 pounds more, that's 5,000 pounds less of stuff that you can haul. And so all those loads where they're trying to cram it as full as they can and put as much weight on as they can, you're not going to be eligible for. And so it's going to limit you.
Well, and fuel economy, I would imagine.
On top of that, yeah, that's not going to be the most economic fuel-wise vehicle out there. And so again, that's where you're competing. If you're getting 5 miles of the gallon and the bigger fleets that you're running against are getting 7 miles of the gallon, you're just not going to be able to compete, and you're not going to be able to make money at it. So that kind of thing is super critical.
Yeah. And so what other things are we looking for?
I knew I wanted to have a sliding fifth wheel, especially if you're going into California and you've got to be able to adjust your fifth wheel a little bit to adjust your weight some, and obviously a sleeper. You got to have a sleeper for if you're doing over the road stuff.
Yeah, and I mean you are going long distances. What's the longest you've done so far?
Houston to Portland.
Okay, that's not a bad trip.
That is a pretty good trip. It was a lot of miles.
No kidding. Yeah, you're racking them up with that. And you mentioned, that obviously you want to get a truck with all this stuff that's not going to cost you an arm and a leg, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That operating cost is super critical.
Yeah, and it's not just the upfront cost, it's the operating cost going forward. So you're talking about fuel economy and being able to fit more in your load than you would otherwise if you had a super heavy truck to begin with. That's really interesting stuff. So let me guess. The third one is you want to make sure that you can deck it out with the sweet chrome, all the nice, what do you call them, Christmas lights, the nice running lights, all that stuff. You got to build that into the cost, Chris.
No, Probably not. Maybe once you've been on the road for a couple of years and you have nothing but lots of money to spend on your truck, you can spend on those kind of things. But yeah, there's really kind of three main factors that you've got to consider as far as the operating cost or the cost of the truck. The first one is that initial purchase price. The second one is the operating expenses, and the third one is really the resale value on the truck. That's what in the industry they call the total cost of ownership. And I'm really not going to talk a whole lot about the resale piece, but we'll talk a little bit about that upfront cost and then the operating cost that you mentioned.
All right, so we've talked about the upfront cost. You've talked about that a little bit. That seems pretty self-explanatory, right? But it's about more than just the raw cost, and even more than just giant operating cost numbers. It's going to be hard to come up with a number of this is going to cost me X number of $1,000 per year. Right?
Yeah, and it's kind of tricky because you're going to look at a truck that, let's say you look at a truck that's got 500,000 miles that sells for $50,000, where you've got a truck that's got 400,000 miles on it that's selling for $60,000. How do you compare those two differences? One's less expensive but's got more miles versus one that's more expensive with fewer miles. So the way that this is where my spreadsheet starts to come in where
I start itching.
Is where you start itching, but it's important because that's where I use the spreadsheet to kind of say, okay, how do I differentiate the higher mileage, lower cost versus lower mileage, higher cost? And so what I did is I created a column on the spreadsheet that kind of analyzes the cost per mile of the useful life left in the truck. And I kind of just used a subjective number. I said the life of the truck's 1 million miles. Now, some trucks are going to get a little more than that. Some trucks are going to do less. But for the sake of the spreadsheet and being able to compare things, I use that 1 million mile mark. So what I basically did was created a formula on the spreadsheet that would show, if I paid $60,000 for a truck with 400,000 miles on it, how much was that costing me per mile versus one that I bought at 500,000 miles for only $50,000. How much was that costing me per mile up to that 1 million mile? And that's
going to be a much easier number to digest, right? You're talking cents per mile.
Yeah.
At that point, right?
Yeah. So you take, for example, let's just use an example. Let's say you've got two Freightliners that are exactly the same, except for the first one has 400,000 miles, costs $70,000, and the second one has 500,000 miles, but only costs $65,000. So the first one has about 600,000 miles of life left, and that calculates out to be about 12 cents a mile.
With that, what was our difference in cost? $5,000?
$5,000.
Okay.
Yep. And the second one has about 500,000 miles left on it, or 13 cents a mile. So even though that
the first one is going to be cheaper, the first one at 12 cents a mile, even though that doesn't sound like much, 12 cents versus 13 cents, when you're going to put another 500 to 600,000 miles on the truck, that's going to add up. That's what, 10 grand?
It is. It's going to add up. And, plus that, even though that second one has a little bit higher price, the mileage, the amount per mile left of useful life is lower. And so in reality, that one may be a better deal for you. And so
it's confusing, Chris. You're killing me.
It is confusing, but that's where the spreadsheet kind of, you can pull it up and look at it. And all you have to do is plug in the price of the vehicle, and the spreadsheet will automatically calculate it. Then you can just use that as a comparison tool. That's not going to say that necessarily means that truck with a lower per mile cost is the right one to buy. It's just a factor that can help you make a better decision.
Okay, interesting. So, and this spreadsheet, you went to all this trouble to create this spreadsheet. You're going to share this out. We're going to let people
It'll be on
have
the
a
website
look.
For sure.
And this one is going to be, this one's at motorcarrierhq.com. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay, so we've got our show notes, and I'm sure we'll have a link to
there'll be a link in the show notes. Most of the tools that we talk about on the podcast are going to be on the Motor Carrier HQ website, but they'll all be linked in the show notes on the Haulin AssetsLLC.com podcast site.
We really should have just called it Haulin Assets, just to avoid the confusion. No, but it's much cooler this way.
It's much cooler this way. Absolutely.
All right. So what else do you want to go over? What else did you try to use to figure out which truck was going to cost you the least, and it's, again, like you said, it's not necessarily which one is going to cost you the least. That might not be the only thing that you considered. What else are you?
So step one was, really to kind of limit that upfront cost and get the best value as much as you can. Step two is really talking about buying a truck that won't cost you an arm and a leg to operate. And there's really three big operating costs for any truck. So the first one's fuel, the second one's maintenance, and the third one's repairs. We'll talk a lot about fuel and repairs, but not a ton about maintenance, because really the maintenance piece is going to be the same across most trucks. There's not a big difference between how much an oil change in one truck costs versus the oil change in another truck. The tire wear, all that kind of stuff, brake wear, not a huge difference from one brand or one truck to another. So fuel, obviously super important, and repairs are important. So let's talk a little bit about repairs first. One of the big things, especially with these newer trucks, that is a big maintenance expense or repair expense is the DPF. So new trucks have a very elaborate exhaust system to help control pollution, and the big piece of that is called the DPF, or the diesel particulate filter. And that whole system on a new truck, believe it or not, costs about $20,000 to $30,000.
Seriously?
It's a big, expensive
like
piece of a truck.
Yeah, of what you're talking about.
It is.
Wow.
And so you don't want to be having to repair that any more than you need to. And they can be very problematic, especially on some newer engines, back in, 2010 to 2013, 14, when these things were really starting to come out to a certain extent heavily. And so there were some big changes made to them. Some makes and models and engines are really having a big problem with them. So you need to be careful with them. One of the things that's really bad on DPFs and that whole exhaust system are trucks that get idled a lot. When you idle them, the exhaust system doesn't get hot enough for the system to work really well, and it clogs up that DPF and it causes all kinds of problems. So one of the factors that I decided that was going to be important for me was a truck that hadn't idled a ton.
And how do you tell? Is that just logged?
It is actually. You can look on a truck and you can see the number of hours that the engine is run versus the number of miles that are on the truck. So one of the things that I looked at is I created in the spreadsheet another formula that took into account the number of hours and the number of miles. And it basically, there's a column that shows how many miles were driven per hour the truck was in operation. And that varied quite a bit. It actually varied from, I think the lower end was about 20 miles per hour, and on the higher end it was closer to 50 miles per hour.
And so what are you looking for?
So I'm looking one that's got a higher mileage range. So more miles run under fewer hours. That just shows that it's obviously not being idled a ton. And another way that you can kind of tell too is if a truck's had a APU, the auxiliary power unit, it doesn't have to be idled as much, because when the driver's asleep, the APU's running and keeping the truck cool or hot, and you're not having to idle the truck to manage that climate inside of the truck. So that was a good indicator. If it's had an APU, it's probably not going to be have nearly as many hours on it.
And tell me more about what does APU stand for? You said auxiliary power unit.
So it's like a generator that runs the electrical system and the heating and cooling inside of the truck.
And are you looking as carefully at the APU as you were at this?
Not all trucks have an APU. DPF? So not all trucks have an APU on them. Some fleets run their trucks without them, and they just get idled a bunch.
Right.
So was I looking at them? Yes, that was. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But an APU for me was an important factor. I wanted to have it.
Okay.
And some fleets will run their truck with an APU, but they'll pull the APU off when they sell the truck and put it on their next truck. Yeah. So that's another thing you kind of have to look out for is maybe it had an APU, it just doesn't have one right now, and it's pretty easy to tell.
Yeah. What does a new APU run if you have to put one on?
About $10,000 to $12,000.
Oh.
So they're not cheap.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
No wonder they rip them off and put them on another truck.
Yep.
All right. So what else are you doing to keep repair costs down? Any other tidbits?
Yeah, so there's definitely a few more things that were really kind of important to me. We talked already a little bit about the mileage. I obviously wanted to get that truck that's in that 400,000 to 500,000 mile range. Another thing that's really important too is the fleet that it came from. A lot of the times, the dealership that you buy a truck from will be able to tell you what fleet operated it, and some fleets have a much better reputation of doing a good job of keeping up with those preventative maintenance things, doing oil changes every 20,000 miles instead of every 40,000 miles. If they're running the truck governed, it's running at a slower speed, which is easier on the engine. It's easier on the suspension. You're not going over, it actually makes a big difference if you're going over bumps at 65 miles an hour versus 75,000 miles an hour. So all those things kind of factor into it.
If you're doing 75,000 miles an hour
in
your truck,
you're delivering a lot of loads really fast, huh? 75 miles an hour.
I mean, I knew what you meant, but still.
Well, thanks.
It was a fun image. This. Did you ever see Spaceballs?
Yeah.
Now I've got this
maximum
image of
plaid. I'm driving maximum plaid is what I'm doing.
Awesome. Okay. What was it? Yeah, you had a third thing, right?
Yeah. So the third thing is that I think is really important is I took the truck to an independent mechanic and I had a dyno done and I had them look it over. I had them do a full DOT inspection. I had them do that on both the truck, and the truck I ended up buying had an APU, putting in a little teaser here, had an APU on it. So I had them check out the APU as well. And all of that cost me $425.66, but that's well worth it. The dyno checked out. It was getting more than the horsepower that it was rated for, more than kind of what they were expecting. And the mechanic looked at it and said, obviously this came from a fleet that takes really good care of their trucks. He said it's in great shape. That peace of mind is important.
So that 400 and some odd bucks that you spent on that, you had already done your research, and so you had a pretty good idea.
I was going to buy that truck unless the mechanic saw issues with it.
Okay.
So
it's not like I kind of like this truck. Oh, maybe I'll send it to my mechanic. That's not what you're talking about here. It's almost like this is the last step of the decision.
That was the last step. I knew at that point that I was going to buy the truck.
Nice. Okay. All right. So it sounds like there are a lot of things to consider, a lot of steps to take. Again, people are going to be able to see those steps that you took in the show notes at haulinassetsllc.com. But yeah, what else do we want to talk about, Chris?
Well, I just kind of want to really quick reiterate that buying that truck is really one of the biggest, most important things that you're going to do. And I've got this theory, I've seen clients over the years, one of the biggest reasons, if not the biggest reasons that they go out of business, whether it's in that first year or that second year, is because of a big expense that comes up because they bought a truck that was really old. Blown engines, blown transmissions, even sometimes just having to replace the turbos is more than somebody can come up with. So that's why I think it's important that you go into this and you buy a truck that doesn't have too many miles, even if that means, say right now today you could afford to buy a truck that's got 800,000 miles on it. I think in most situations you're better off save money for another year or so and get to that point where you can buy a truck that's got fewer miles.
And it's going to be kinder to you.
It's going to be kinder. It's going to increase your chances of success, because it does you no good if you buy something that causes you to go out of business in that first year. You're better off being a little bit patient and being able to afford that truck that is going to last you for at least a good 2 or 3 years.
And before I forget, actually, this is something that you have brought up on a previous episode, and I want to make sure I talk about it here, and that's fuel expense. So you've talked about repairs and getting a truck.
Oh, we forgot about that one, huh? Yeah, fuel.
Yeah, exactly. So that's going to be a factor that goes into this process, right? I mean, you mentioned it a little bit with the weight of the truck, what kind of truck you're getting, but you mentioned in another episode that getting a truck that gets 5 miles per gallon versus one that does 7 is going to be a huge difference over, again, we're talking about 500,000 miles here. That's a big expense, right?
It is a huge expense. you're looking at that difference between 5 miles to the gallon versus 7 miles to the gallon over the course of 1 year is about $25,000. And that kind of varies a little bit depending on the price of fuel,
Right.
which obviously fluctuates, but easily, I mean, $25,000 a year.
Oof. Yeah, if not more, like you
Yeah,
said.
and that's if you look at the profit of a one trucking company at the end of a year, if you're missing out on $25,000 of profit, that's a big chunk of your profit. And
Especially as a sole proprietor, or
usually
a sole owner.
That's another reason to buy a truck that's a little bit newer and not as old, because they're typically getting better fuel economy these days, and you'll save that money that you paid up front for a little newer truck in the fuel economy over time.
Okay. All right. Now, I am sick and tired of waiting, Chris. I've had enough. We've talked about fuel costs and repair costs and upfront costs. I'm done. I want to know what kind of truck you bought.
We haven't talked about the creature comforts yet.
All right. Tell me about your creature. What? Okay. Yeah. Tell me what you were looking for, because this is going to tell me what kind of truck you bought.
I got. Okay. So this is a little bit of a teaser. It'll tease you for a few minutes anyway. All right. So, a couple of things that were important to me. Obviously, we talked a little bit about the APU. I wanted to have an APU so I could be comfortable, not have to idle my truck. The idling a truck, especially when the AC is running and stuff like that, you're talking at least a gallon an hour, almost 2 gallons an hour, especially if the AC is running, and, over an 8-10 hour period. I mean, that's a lot of fuel, and that's a big expense. Whereas an APU is a lot less expensive. You can still stay comfortable. So that having an APU is important. I wanted to be able to have a fridge so that I could eat relatively healthy. I wasn't having to eat dinner at a truck stop every night. Be able to have an inverter so I could recharge my computer and, plug in my electronics,
Right.
all that kind of stuff. I want to be able to have that.
King size bed, big flat screen TV.
Flat screen TV, yes. King size bed. I didn't buy the big, huge, long RV on the end of my truck. Maybe one of these days. But no.
So what were your absolute must-haves? I mean, you've talked about some things that were nice to have.
The fridge was a must-have. I wanted to, if I couldn't get a truck with a fridge, I was going to put a fridge in it, which you can buy them at aftermarket, obviously. So that was a must-have. An inverter was definitely a must-have, and the APU was a must-have. Even if I bought a truck that didn't have one, I was going to have one installed.
Right. And then any other nice to haves that kind of go along with all these that
Yeah,
you haven't mentioned?
there were a few nice to have. So, there's a single bunk and double bunks. I wanted to have a double bunk in case I wanted to bring somebody along with me, or if there was ever an opportunity to team drive or anything like that.
Yeah.
Plus, it makes a good shelf to be able to put things on. So a double bunk was important, but not a must-have. One of the other things that's a huge topic when buying a truck is transmission.
Yeah, this is one that I would ask about.
Yeah. It's kind of funny because I went into this whole process saying, no matter what, I'm going to get a manual transmission. I feel like I'd be cheating on my first truck if I bought an automatic. The automatics have become increasingly more popular over the last 5 years or so because for most people, they're easier to drive, and they actually get a little bit better fuel economy. The studies show that they get about 0.2 of a gallon a mile better, which doesn't sound like a lot, but over time
Again,
it
500,000 miles.
Yeah, it saves some money. A couple $1,000 at least a year in fuel economy. That 0.2 of a gallon.
Yeah, it reminds me of I was reading a book by some guy who was trying to decide between getting he was getting an SUV to go cross country across the Gobi Desert or something like that, and he said, I want to get a Mercedes and I want it to be a manual transmission. And the guy who was his consultant on the project said, no, you want an automatic. And he said, no, I love manual transmissions. And he says, you know what? Mercedes has been doing this a long time. They know how to drive cars better than you. He says, okay, fine, you can.
Well, and that's actually one of the arguments that, talking to some mechanics and some other experts in the industry that they make is, with that automatic, it always, it gets better fuel economy because it always shifts at the right RPM. It's better on the transmission because it always shifts at the right RPM. it makes a lot of sense that way. So, talking to a lot of people, they had me kind of convinced that, maybe that automatic transmission I could live with and not feel guilty about. And so I actually went into the process of thinking, okay, you know what, I would like to have the manual transmission still, but I probably would be okay with an automatic.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, yeah. Any other creature comforts you want to talk about, or do I get to ask the big question?
I think you might be able to ask the big question now.
Okay. Hang on. I want to prepare myself. All right.
Drum roll? Do we need a drum roll?
I don't have any drums in here. It's a quiet studio, Chris. All right. What'd you get?
I got a 2015 Kenworth T680.
Oh, a Kenworth.
A Kenworth.
And all the Peter guys and all the...
I know. I'm sorry to disappoint the Petes and the Freightliner guys. I probably won't be... I think the Pete guys are a little bit more diehard Pete guys than the Freightliners are. So I'm not sure the Freightliner people are going to be super disappointed like the Petes will.
Right.
The people that like Petes, they're pretty loyal. It's like Harley Davidson.
I want you to break this down in terms I can understand. Ford, Dodge, and Chevy. Which one's which?
Ooh, that's hard. I don't know.
What is a Kenworth?
God, that's a good question. I don't know. I don't even know how you could categorize it.
The way you're talking about it, it sounds like Peterbilt would be the Ford of this situation. With the Ford owners are a special breed.
They are, yeah. So maybe a Chevy. I don't know. Yeah. Maybe the Dodge is a Freightliner. I don't know.
This is a nonsense question.
Yeah,
it's fun. Okay, so tell me a little bit more about it.
So I got the Kenworth T680. I'm actually super happy with it. It's been a great truck so far. I got the PACCAR MX-13 engine, which is it's interesting because the first few years it was one of those that was having trouble with the exhaust system for the first few years. But the engine that I got, from everything that I've seen and read, they've gotten past that and it's been reliable. Hasn't had the exhaust system issues that it was having early. The engine itself has actually been run in Europe for a really long time. It's had a good history there, and so I feel good about that. And I got my manual transmission, an Eaton 13-speed manual.
So now you're driving like a big kid.
I'm driving like a big kid. I don't know, the transmission really likes me a whole lot at this point because I'm still
you're
there's
yelling,
too much of that.
You're leaning out the window yelling at the engine, "Hey, I'm a rookie."
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, there's still a little bit too much of that. If you can't find it, grind it. I'm getting better, but I still have a little bit of ways to go.
There's some dirty jokes to be had in there.
I'm sure there are.
We'll just skip right over those.
Family friendly, right? So it had 477,000 miles on it when I bought it. It had an APU, as I'd mentioned, inverter, all that good stuff. So it had pretty much everything I want. And you know what? I've already had some repairs on it. I had to replace the batteries.
Really?
Yeah, and it cranked and it worked well. But the problem it was having was the inverter. Because the batteries were only able to hold about a 10.5 volt charge. And so the inverter was thinking the batteries were dead. And so the inverter would quit working. So I couldn't use a lot of my electronics. It would just trip the inverter. So I ended up replacing all the batteries. That solved that problem. Everything's working great now.
Oh, that's good. All right. And you did text me at one point. I didn't know what kind of truck you had necessarily, but you texted me and said, "I've had my truck for a week," and tell us what happened.
So my first run was from Salt Lake to Fort Worth, taking yogurt down to Fort Worth, and in Fort Worth I picked up a load of milk cartons that were delivered to a plant up in northern Utah. And I was driving at like 3:00 in the morning between Monticello and Moab, Utah, and a deer decided to play full-on linebacker and ran. I want to point this out. I did not hit the deer.
The deer
hit me. It hit literally full-blown running perpendicular to the truck right into the driver's door.
T-boned you.
T-boned me. Yeah.
And you lowered the window and said, "Hey, I'm a rookie."
Hey, sorry. No, there wasn't even time for that. After hitting the side of my truck, he went under the trailer tires. Ooh. And yeah, poor guy.
Ouch. Well, this is going to come up. Actually, I want to bring this up again in just a second because as soon as you said that, I had a thought that I'm going to bring up in a moment. But first, let's wrap up. I feel like we're at a place where we can wrap up. Sum up for me, Chris, if you would, the key points that people need to take out of this episode, what they're going to find in the show notes, that sort of thing.
Okay, so the spreadsheet's going to be in the show notes. I'll probably, in the show notes, just kind of do some bullet points of, here are the things that I kind of felt like are really critical that you need to get to buy in the truck. You want to make sure that you don't buy a truck that is already too worn out, that's going to cost you a ton of money to operate. Don't be lured in by that, hey, this one's going to be really cheap up front, because I've got this theory, I've seen it happen too many times, that when you do that, it bites you in the butt in the long run, just because your expenses go through the roof.
Sure.
And it's hard to make money when you're doing that. So be diligent, be patient, look at a bunch of trucks. And I looked at a ton, and eventually when I saw the one I wanted, I knew it. When I saw it, I knew it. And it had what I needed.
This might be a good kind of case to bring up, a use case to bring up for partnerships, right? Where if you don't feel like, I don't quite have the capital necessary to get the truck that is going to get the job done, it could be that somebody with a little bit of capital could help you out and start that partnership with you.
Absolutely. That's a good value a partner can bring, is our finances. So you may be the brains behind the operation and the guy that's doing most of the elbow work, and maybe you've got a partner that helps provide some of the financing.
Yeah, very good. Well, let's go ahead and wrap this one up. I do want to let people know what's going to be coming up, and this is what the deer made me think of. We're going to be doing an insurance episode here coming up pretty soon, and that's what the deer made me think of. You were out on the road for a week. The deer takes out, the casing, right, on the side of the truck.
I'll put a picture of the damage that the deer caused. It wasn't extensive.
It wasn't catastrophic.
I've been able to, I haven't actually got it repaired yet because I've been running hard. I just haven't had time to get it repaired. But some pop rivets and some duct tape, and it's making down the road. Yep, it's nice. Nothing's flapping in the wind. It's all solid.
But it's still something that goes to show you never know what's going to happen.
You don't know what's going to happen.
You can get the shiniest truck out there, and Bambi's gonna tag the side of that thing, and suddenly
left its mark.
Yeah,
and some hair. There's still some hair. On the truck.
This got dark.
Yeah,
this episode got dark. But another thing that I want to do.
I guess it wouldn't be hair. It'd be fur.
Well,
Bambi fur.
That doesn't make it any less dark.
No,
I'll tell you. One thing I'd like to do is revisit the truck and how it's doing and everything in, 8-12 months, something like that. Yeah, I
think at the year, I think that's a really good thing. I think we'll look at it. We'll look at all the expenses, like the repair expenses we've spent, how much fuel economy we've got with it, how much we spent. So at the year mark, I plan on doing that. We'll kind of, was this a good decision? Would we have been better off buying something even newer, or should we even, would we be okay buying something older?
Right. Yeah, well, that'll be interesting stuff, and hopefully, everybody will be following along with us as we get closer and closer to that, and talk about those numbers. So if you are not yet, please subscribe to this podcast on whatever service works best for you. We're available on iTunes and Spotify and Stitcher and all of them. So check us out there, and if you enjoy what we do, please be kind and leave a review. They help us quite a bit. And of course, share this with anybody who you think it might be valuable for. Chris, anything else that we want to mention?
I think that's good. Now we just be dragging it out.
Okay. Last one, HaulinAssetsLLC.com for the show notes. Got to get that in one last time.
One last time.
Okay, Chris, I'll see you next time.
Sounds great.